Welcome back, beautiful souls, to another episode of Divine Duality, the podcast where we wrestle with the tension between who we've been and who we're becoming, between the divine call and our daily reality. I'm your host, Tiffany Pete, and today we're entering a space that many of us know intimately: chaos. Not just the chaos around us, but the kind that swirls within us. This episode is titled Clarity in the Chaos. And if you're walking through a season that feels disoriented, disjointed, or simply too loud to hear what's next, you're not alone. Let's breathe through this together. You know, for a long time, I thought clarity meant control. That once I figured everything out, then I'd feel peace. That once the schedule was perfect, the vision was clear, and the plan was secure, then I'd know I was walking in purpose. But life doesn't always come packaged in precision. Sometimes the most sacred seasons are the most disoriented and disordered. Sometimes the most divine instructions come in the middle of breakdowns. And I've learned that chaos isn't always a curse. It's often the classroom where God reshapes our perspective. It strips us of our false certainties so we can be anchored in real truth. Because clarity isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper that only shows up when everything else goes quiet or falls apart. I like to say that in the stillness is where God speaks most, where you can hear him the loudest, right? And sometimes it's really hard to just be still when everything around you is chaotic and crazy and uncertain, right? I've said the words disordered and disoriented quite a bit already. And honestly, when you're in that space where everything is just crazy, it's really hard to see your path. It's really hard to figure out where you're going. It's really hard to stand firm in your purpose and in your calling and to trust the process. Because it's real easy for doubt to come in and confusion to set in and just kind of take root within your spirit and within your soul because nothing is making sense. And if you're constantly listening to the noise that is being created in these chaotic situations, then it's really hard to hear the voice of the Lord and to make sure that you are doing what you are called to do, right? So sometimes, I'll say that again, it's a whisper that only shows up when everything else goes quiet or falls apart. And therein lies your clarity. So let me tell you a story. I was in a season where everything looked good from the outside. I was excelling at work. I was showing up for my family. I was pursuing my goals. I was leading in spaces and external affiliations. I was networking, I was connecting with a lot of people. I had opportunities that were, knocking at my door. Like all this great stuff. But then on the inside, there was unrest. I was constantly in a battle. I'd even go so far to say turmoil within myself. Because I was doing all the right things, but none of it felt aligned. And the more I tried to control it, the more chaotic it felt, the more uncertain I became, the more confused I got, the more I started doubting things. Essentially, the more I started spiraling, right? And it was in that space where I was raw, exposed, tired, overwhelmed, exhausted, that eventually, because it didn't happen automatically and it didn't happen at the onset, but eventually, I think I had gotten to a place where you could say I was depressed. I sat up and I started thinking about things, and that's when I determined that I was going to stop performing. And I simply asked God, what are you saying that I'm too busy to hear? And, we hear that phrase, be careful what you ask for. Because sometimes you're going to receive an answer you don't want. It might even be an answer you're not even ready for. But that's what I asked him. I said, God, what are you saying that I'm too busy to hear? And slowly, very quietly, I felt a shift. It wasn't a booming voice screaming at the top of the rafters. It wasn't billboards with the answer. It was a very quiet voice. And it wasn't a step-by-step plan. What I got, though, was peace. Knowing that clarity was coming, but I had to release my grip long enough to receive it. And what I mean by that is I had to give up control. I had to be like Elsa and I had to let it go. Because so often I find myself wanting to control things like, oh, I can take care of this. I can handle this. I can make sure this gets done. I can do this. And, I sometimes have a problem delegating. So, I had to let go of control. I had to stop and release some things, or all the things rather, in order for me to gain clarity. And that honestly was like super, super hard to do, because I do not like being in situations where I don't know what's happening, right? Even like work, sorority, pageantry, motherhood, marriage, family. Like, I don't like being in situations where I can't foresee what's going to happen or control how things are going to happen. And so with that, let's talk about what clarity is. Let's like redefine it, because I think sometimes when we hear that word, we know that clarity means like clear. But it can also be misconstrued with perfection, and that is not what clarity is. Clarity is not perfection. It's not having all the answers. But what it is alignment. It's when your spirit recognizes that even if the path you are on is unfamiliar, that it's true and it's correct. And that is where you're supposed to be. Even if it's not public, and by even if it's not public, I mean that realization of your clarity is personal, right? You receiving clarity isn't for everyone else to know. It's for you. And so even if it doesn't make sense to anybody else, which I get a lot, it brings peace to you. Oftentimes, I am in a space where I'm at peace and I make a decision about something, or I move in a certain way, and I will have people on the outside looking in telling me, like, what you're doing doesn't make sense. This, why are you doing things this way? What, this, why don't you try doing something, things this way? Or why don't you go here? Or why don't you make this decision? Or you make this choice? And I sometimes just look at them and I'm like, okay, I won't say anything. And when I do respond, I'm like, I'm making the best decision for me. And there's I mean, the conversations and the like looks I get is insane. But I know at the end of the day that even if it doesn't make sense to someone else, it makes perfect sense to me. And I know it makes sense because it brings peace, right? I'm not stressed. I'm not worried. I'm at peace. So clarity is when you're walking in, when what you're walking in feels more honest than what you're leaving behind. But here's the truth. Clarity often emerges after surrender. Like I talked about, being like Elsa, you gotta let it go. You gotta give up control. You gotta be able to just let go and let God. It doesn't come after striving, doesn't come after overthinking, comes after surrender. So, let me offer you 3 practices that have helped me anchor myself when the noise is too loud. First one is stillness before strategy. So before you make a plan, make space. Sit in the silence and ask, what am I avoiding to stay busy? Anybody who knows me knows that I don't like to be still. I don't like to sit still. I'm constantly working. You could call me a workaholic if you want. And I would say that that is a true description of who I am. But I have this strong need to always be busy. I do not like to be idle. And that I have realized is a defense mechanism for me, just because of traumatic experiences and things I've gone through in the past. Like, I know that if I'm busy, then I feel like I'm being purposeful. And that's not always the case, because sometimes I'm just being busy so I don't have to deal with whatever feelings, hard feelings I'm feeling. And I don't have to have hard conversations, because if I don't have the time to sit and feel those things, and I don't have the time to have those conversations, well, then it goes away. It doesn't. It just gets bottled up, swept under a rug. And eventually that volcano is going to erupt, and I will have no choice but to sit in and feel those things. But up until that point, I will stay busy. So before you make a plan, make space. Sit in the silence. And yes, sometimes the silence is so loud, but don't move. Sit in it and ask yourself, what am I avoiding by staying busy? And then I took up writing again. I used to write a while back in the day, and then I stopped. And so I started journaling again, and I started journaling the confusion. So what that means, what does that mean? I stopped waiting for the perfect revelation. I started writing down what I like to call my messy middle. What is taking place, right? Let me be honest with myself and write down all the junk, all the crap, just all of it. Good, bad, and different. Regardless of how messy and chaotic it is, let me write it down. And the reason I did that was because clarity lives in your honesty. And at some point, I had to stop lying to myself about what was taking place in my life, where I was going, and how I was walking or not walking in the call that was on my life. And then, while journaling was hard, this next one was a little bit harder, I'd say. And that was discerning my inner volume. Because sometimes the chaos is not external. And I will be honest that it's a little 50-50 in my life. Sometimes half the time the chaos is external, and then half the time the chaos is internal. And so I had to check the volume of fear, of doubt, of confusion, of perfectionism, of all of the things within myself. And I had to turn that volume down because it was too loud and it was affecting every part of my life. And I had to turn the volume up on faith and trust. And that was really, really really hard to do because I have a hard time trusting people, and I have a hard time sometimes just trusting processes. And I have a hard time putting my faith into things. And so really having to do that self-reflection and say, okay, fear, not today. Okay, doubt, not today. You know what, perfectionism? I don't have to be perfect. It's okay. Turn that down. Confusion, I'm going to turn you down. The self-lies, I'm going to turn you down. And I'm going to trust in the one who created me. And I'm going to trust that his plan is far better than my plans. And I'm going to trust that he has me and he knows where I'm going. And turn that volume up. And I have to put faith in the plan and turn that volume up. So you guys know that I love to do reflective prompts and journalings. You figured it out by now. You listened to the first 3 episodes. You're in episode 4, and it's not going to be any different. So there is a reflection that I want, and here's what I want to ask you. Where in your life are you clinging to control, thinking that it's going to give you clarity? I'll say it again. Where in your life are you clinging to control, thinking that it's going to give you clarity? What would it look like to release the need to know and trust that you're being guided? Again, what would it look like to release the need to know and trust that you're being guided? Remember that clarity isn't a destination, it's a process. And sometimes the fog is part of the path. So take some time this week to sit with that, journal it, pray through it, ask God to help you find the signal in the static. And, of course, if this episode blessed you, would you do me a favor? Share with someone who's sitting in their own chaos right now. Let them know that they're not broken, they're becoming. And don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and tag me on social with your thoughts. Next week, we'll go even deeper in episode 5. I'm not who I was, but not yet who I'm becoming. Whew, I already feel that one stirring. But until then, take this with you. The chaos doesn't cancel the calling, and clarity is coming. Just not always in the way you expected. Keep trusting, keep becoming. I'm Tiffany Igbete. This is Defined Duality, and I'll catch you next week in the tension.